We begin in southern Gaza, where at least 40 people have been killed and 60 injured in an Israeli attack in an area housing displaced people. Warplanes bombed an encampment in al-Mawasi, west of Khan Younis. It happened in the vicinity of a field hospital run by the British charity UK Med. The attack caused large craters and widespread devastation. Emergency teams are recovering bodies and the injured. Israel's military says it targeted a Hamas command centre, but Hamas has called the claim a blatant lie. But earlier in central Gaza, an Israeli airstrike killed several people after a home was targeted in the al-Bureij refugee camp. The injured were rushed to al-Aqsa Hospital in Deir al-Balah. Bara Zuhaili is a vascular surgeon who has recently returned from Gaza. He joins us now from Flint in Michigan. Welcome to the programme. Describe, if you can, the kind of chaos and devastation that ensues when airstrikes target people living in tents and makeshift homes, and how that affects any kind of rescue effort.
So in Gaza, there is a common phrase that I learned recently. It's very funny and very sad at the same time. The phrase goes as, in Gaza, whoever died has survived, and whoever survived is dying. So anytime I hear something like this, I hear about 40, 50 people are dead, my heart or my mind goes to the people who have survived this attack. And by no means, I'm not saying that 40 people is not a significant number of deaths. Even one civilian dying is one too many. But honestly, what I saw in those kind of attacks when I was there is not only the severity of the people who actually died, it's the injuries that happened around it. For example, one of the stories that really stuck to my mind in one of those attacks, there was something that they called a precision attack. They were attacking one specific tent around al-Aqsa Hospital, where I was in Khan Younis. And supposedly they attacked one tent. But about 20 tents away from that tent, we have multiple injuries. And one specific story that came to me that really broke my heart at the time was I was in the ER in al-Aqsa Hospital, and I saw a young lady. She's in her late 20s. She was literally pacing from one side of the ER to the other. She would stay in one side of the ER for about 2-3 minutes, and then she would literally pace quickly to the other side. And I was so fascinated. I was like, what is she doing? Why is she doing this? So I dropped everything I'm doing and I ran after her. And it turns out that this lady, she's a mother of two. Her two daughters, one is 6 and one is 9 or 10, I believe. One daughter has significant shrapnel came to her face, destroying half of her face. And I apologize if I'm sharing too much graphic information, but I think people has to know this. Literally, her brain was sticking out. You could see the brain material of that little child. And the ER staff said, you know what? She's beyond any resuscitation effort. We will let her just pass away. Yet she was still breathing. She was still grasping for air. So they put her on one side of the ER where they let all the little kids die peacefully, quote unquote, peacefully. On the other end of the ER, it was her other daughter who has both legs amputated, and she was actively bleeding from both legs. So this young mother, she was torn physically and mentally. She was racing from one side of the ER to say goodbye to her daughter, whose brain is showing and who's sending her last breath, going to the other side of the ER to put some pressure on the other daughter, who is actively bleeding from both amputated legs. So this is the kind of chaos that we get after each one of those attacks. And again, the focus usually in the media is about the one who died, and no disrespect to them, that's really tragedy. But my heart as a surgeon or as a physician goes to the injured, mostly pediatric injuries that happen around those severity or around those casualties.
And with that kind of unimaginable trauma that you describe, how do you even attempt to carry out medical procedures without the equipment or supplies that are actually needed?
You try your best. And the sad part is, even when you try your best, even when we've done, and I'm so proud of my colleagues in Gaza, the doctors, the nurses, I have seen some amazing cases that are done under the bombardment. But even with that, even with those heroic efforts, in between cases, whenever I have no cases, no surgery to do, I will just go do rounds and just check random patient in the hospital. And it wasn't uncommon where I would go to see someone, and I will ask that someone, you have some bandage, you have some gauze in your legs. When was the last time that someone changed that bandage? And the standard of care in the US is at least once a day. At least once a day, you should change the bandage so it doesn't get infected. And the very common answer would be, oh, the last time someone changed this bandage was 6 weeks ago. So I will grab my scissor and I will cut that bandage to see what's underneath it. And very, very common, I would see live maggot and worms coming out of the wound. It was literally eating the flesh of that poor patient because no one has even simple gauze. When we talk about supplies in Gaza, I'm not talking about fancy supplies. I'm not talking about surgical material or surgical instrument. I'm literally talking about simple gauze and tape. They don't have it. And that leads to the patient I just described to you, where no one has changed the gauze for 6 weeks to the point where the maggots and the worms are physically eating his flesh. And very often we'll end up amputating that leg because it was no use, just because of the lack of simple material, which is gauze and dressing and tape.
With all of this, how do you feel, not just as a surgeon, but as a human being, when you hear of these kind of ongoing strikes?
I honestly, I don't have a way to describe it. The way I would think about it is, what's the point? Like, what is the end game of this? What is, and not only the airstrike, I often saw pediatric kids coming up with a bullet to the head. And honestly, in my mind, I'm thinking, how is that a military target? How is a kid who's barely 10 or 11 with a bullet to his head? How is that little kid a military target? Honestly, it goes beyond my ability to understand what's the point of this war anymore, given the significant amount of not only civilian casualties, but pediatric casualties that we see on the TV. And I saw myself multiple times there.
OK, with those harrowing accounts, Dr. Bara Zuhaili, we thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.